police breaking into your house?
I don't know. They say they are detectives. I have been threatened by one of them.
How many is there?
I don't know. They please.
What are they doing?
They just broke in. Okay.
Ma'am?
I did what I had to do to save my life, the life of Deputy McGowen and Malloy at that moment. That's what I did.
He was a crook with a badge, is how I look at it.
McGowen ran up behind us and thanked us for coming to this justified shooting. If ever the hair on the back of my neck stood up, it did then.
It's hard to believe that this whole case started with a misdemeanor traffic stop of a 19-year-old teen, because it did. Now, the deputy who would initiate this traffic stop was Deputy Joseph Kent McGowen with the Harris County Sheriff's Department. For all intents and purposes, let's just say that Deputy McGowen, well, he was less than a good cop. And instead of writing Michael a simple traffic ticket and sending him on his way, Deputy McGowen would talk Michael into being a confidential informant with the Sheriff's Department. That's how this all started.
Michael, like many of us in our teenage years, was young and dumb and agreed because he did not want to get in any trouble by his parents for getting a ticket. Now, after some back and forth with Deputy McGowen, Michael would agree to go undercover and purchase a gun. But there's one problem. Michael doesn't know where to get a gun. So what does he do? He calls his friend, 17-year-old Jason Aguilar, to see if he had any ideas on how he could get a gun. Now, Jason explained to Michael that he didn't have a gun, but he could maybe introduce him to someone who could get him one. Michael would share this information with Deputy McGowen. He got overly excited. Without hesitation, the deputy would put $200 cash in Michael's hand and told him to go set up the buy.
Mind you, by this time, Deputy McGowen had only been with the Sheriff's Department for a couple of months. He saw this as his ticket to the big time. He thought he was super detective. So on the evening of August 23rd, Jason would wind up accompanying Michael to a dark parking lot in town so he can buy this firearm. Jason was essentially a glorified middleman. Obviously, unbeknownst to Jason, this was a sting operation. As the deal went down, Michael would give the signal to Deputy McGowen, who proceeded to rush in on a car wrecker with several other deputies, and everybody got arrested. Now, Jason's mother, Susan White, would find out immediately that her son had been arrested from his girlfriend. Susan not only showed up on scene of the sting operation, she then went down to the jail to try and speak with her son after Jason's arrest, but was turned away by the deputies and given little to no information.
It was pretty clear almost right away to both Susan and her son Jason that Michael had set him up and he was working with the police. So like the mother of any teenage boys, she called Michael's mom.
Jason's mom reaches out and says, you know what is Michael crazy getting mixed up with this guy? I mean, you know, in the real world, people can get hurt. People have even died from doing stuff like that.
Now, Susan's suspicions were confirmed during this phone call. Michael was, in fact, working as a confidential informant. Susan would end up telling Michael's mother that being a confidential informant is very dangerous, especially in the nearby city of Houston. It could be fatal. Now, this conversation would make its way back to Michael Schaefer, who got scared because he realized it was out that he was working as a CI. So he contacted Deputy McGowen, worried about his situation.
That evening, Michael Schaefer paged McGowen, expressing concern over the phone call from Susan White.
He says to McGowen, Susan White has talked to my mother and has talked about a CI being involved. And she said that CIs just don't live long. And this is worrying me because people are going to find out. I'm afraid someone might do something to me. And McGowen says, you've been threatened. Don't you understand? Susan White has threatened your life. I can go and arrest her for that.
And this is where the deputy starts playing in left field. After hearing about the conversation that Susan White had with Michael's mother, Deputy McGowen told Michael that the phone call Susan made was a threat on his life and that she needed to be arrested. Mind you, by this time, Susan's son Jason was already out of jail because that gun charge was never going to stick to him. He never held the money. He never held the gun. Gone. To get this warrant for Susan's arrest, Deputy McGowen's next step was to lie to the local prosecutor. In the middle of the night, Deputy McGowen would fabricate this grandiose story to the prosecutor that Jason and his mother were these gun runners for the cartel, and that Jason was about to get an Uzi and all this bullshit, all to get that prosecutor to write an affidavit to the judge so he would sign a warrant.
Kent McGowen painted a picture of Susan White as being a gun-toting moll and as Jason for being the head of this dangerous gang. And he repeated this to both of the assistant district attorneys he spoke to that night in order to get the warrant for her arrest. It was a lie.
The judge would sign this affidavit, and a felony warrant was issued for Susan's arrest. A felony warrant for retaliation. Now, one thing we haven't brought up until this point was Deputy McGowen and Susan knew each other before this whole gun fiasco. This is alleged based on testimony from people that knew Susan. This is what they had to say.
She told another man that she had a brief fling with that she'd had a one-night stand with a cop and that cop wanted more, and she wasn't interested. And I very much suspect that one-night stand had been with Kent McGowen.
She told me that this Kent McGowen had come to her house and was trying to be a little more friendly than she was prepared for. Susan said that every night almost he would stop by there and knock on the door and start making conversations. He done his normal stuff, you know, you take care of me, I'll see that Jason don't get in any trouble.
Apparently, it got so bad that Susan would wind up making several complaints to Deputy McGowan's superiors.
Susan White approached Captain Harper, and when she was introduced to him, said to him, "I'm having a problem with an officer, Deputy McGowen. He's been sexually harassing me, bothering me, coming over. What do I do? How do I handle it? What should I do?" And that Captain Harper told her, "You need to call Internal Affairs and make the complaint with them."
And these complaints were made just weeks before the gun bust. Susan felt that Deputy McGowen was becoming obsessed. And of course, he left all of this out when obtaining the false warrant for her arrest. Just after midnight on August 25th, 1992, Deputy McGowen, along with two other deputies, went to Susan's home to serve the arrest warrant. Now imagine you're Susan. By this time, Susan was dead asleep, and she woke up to pounding on her front door. Can you imagine the visceral fear Susan must have felt when she realized Deputy McGowen was standing on her front porch? We don't have to imagine how scared Susan was in this moment. We know, because the second she discovered Deputy McGowen was on her front porch, she called 911. And here is that recording.
Who's breaking into your house?
I don't know. They say they are detectives. I've been threatened by one of them.
How many is there?
I don't know. They please.
What are they doing?
They're just broken. Okay.
Ma'am?
While Susan was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, Deputy McGowen was on the phone with his supervisor, asking if he can break down Susan's door.
He was basically asking me for absolution to kick the door in on a felony warrant. So, of course, I told him, I said, "You have a felony warrant in hand, don't you?" "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, kick the door."
Once Deputy McGowen got the blessing from his supervisor, he and another deputy kicked in Susan's back door. You can actually hear this on Susan's 911 phone call when they gain entry.
What are they doing?
They're just broken. Okay.
Ma'am?
But then the call cuts out. And what we now know, within 6 seconds of entering the home, Deputy McGowen would beeline it to Susan's bedroom and shot her 3 times. She died instantly. Deputy McGowen would later tell investigators that he had no choice but to shoot Susan. He states once he entered Susan's bedroom that she was pointing a firearm at him and refused to drop it.
I did what I had to do to save my life, the life of Deputy McGowen and my lawyer at that moment. That's what I did.
Almost immediately, Deputy McGowan's story begins to crumble when compared with the actual evidence. First, investigators began to dig into Deputy McGowan's work history.
The main reason they looked into his past was because of his behavior following the shooting, because he was being super inappropriate and was not acting like he just shot and killed somebody. In fact, he would make other deputies uncomfortable, doing things like asking for the shell casings after the autopsy and the investigation to keep as some sort of memento.
McGowan told Jeff Copeland, anytime you kill somebody, they collect the shell casings and they mount them on a plaque and they give it to you like a trophy.
I've been a cop 25 years, and I've never heard of such a thing.
That's serial killer shit. So when looking into his work history, investigators found that McGowan had worked at 4 departments in the last 6 years. This is how that went.
I pulled his personnel file and I saw all the problems that had occurred in there. There was a number of instances where there was accusations of violent acts. assaults on prisoners and numbers of disputes with other officers, including several female officers that he had been dating.
There was a female officer that I worked with that at one point in time he pulled a gun on her and put the gun to her head and threatened to kill her.
An investigation into McGowan's behavior caused him to resign from the Houston Police Department in January 1989. He then attempted to return a year later, but was required to undergo a psychological evaluation prior to being rehired.
That psychological evaluation told the police department in no uncertain terms they should not rehire Kent McGowen, that he was certainly not police material and would not be a good candidate for rehire.
In an exit evaluation done by the Houston Police Department, Assistant District Attorney Don Smith recalls a chilling response made by one of McGowan's supervisors.
Should this guy be rehired? One of his supervisors said, no, never, that, he will kill somebody one day.
Yeah, he wasn't getting any promotions. He was either being fired or the department would allow him to resign in lieu of being fired.
After failing 2 psychological evaluations, McGowan became an unpaid reserve officer with the Tomball Police Department in May 1989.
There came to light that he was investigating a major Colombian cocaine cartel in Harris County. He puts out that they've got a hit on him and they're going to kill his family. Well, investigation showed there wasn't anything like that. Ultimately, McGowan was fired.
And yes, you heard that correctly. He got fired from his volunteer position at the police department. So there's no surprise that it looks like Deputy McGowan has a history of lying about his investigations with the cartel. He lied while working at the Tomball Police Department. Sounds a lot like him lying about the cartel with Jason and Susan, alleging that they were these big gun runners, which wasn't true at all.
And then there was the actual evidence, which was full of red flags from the beginning. McGowan repeatedly told investigators that he had no interaction with Susan prior to the sting operation, which, based on testimony from his own coworkers, we know that's not true.
Officer Al Kelly, who worked in the same department as McGowan, knew Susan White from his neighborhood patrols. He would eventually testify against McGowan.
The last time that I had spoken to her, she told me that he was harassing her, sexually harassing her, and that she was scared of him. When I told Deputy McGowan to be careful with Susan because she was scared of him, he said, I'll kill that bitch.
But the most damning evidence for Officer McGowan came with the autopsy report.
Reading the autopsy report, it was clear that Deputy McGowan was lying about the shooting. The angling of Susan's wounds show that she was turning away from Deputy McGowan when she was shot, which is completely opposite from what Deputy McGowan said.
Susan White was in profile when the first bullet struck her across the bridge of her nose, which contradicts McGowan's story that she was facing him when he shot her.
The position of Susan White in a seated position, pointing a gun directly at Deputy McGowan is just impossible.
And speaking of the firearm that Susan had, we know he lied about that too. This is Susan's sister, and she uncovered this.
My first question was, what hand was the gun in?
McGowan said and demonstrated how Susan White raised the gun and pointed it toward him with her right hand.
I said, no. I said, Susan is very left-handed.
So by this point, it's pretty clear to the assistant district attorney that Deputy McGowan was not acting in self-defense. This was a crime.
With mounting suspicions, Assistant DA Don Smith did something he had never done in his entire career. He concealed a tape recorder in his pocket and recorded McGowan's version of what happened that night.
That I just wanted to make sure that we got everything down that he said, that there wouldn't be any question about what he had told us during the walkthrough, and make sure it wasn't any difference than what he put in his written statement that he would give later on that morning.
This would all culminate with the arrest of Deputy McGowan. And in March of 1994, he went on trial for the murder of Susan White. And it took the jury less than 5 hours to find Deputy McGowan guilty of taking Susan's life. And he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But let's talk about that 15-year sentence.
At that time, if you were found guilty of a felony in Texas and were sentenced to 15 years or less in prison, you were immediately eligible for an appeals bond. So this made Deputy McGowan eligible for bond after just being found guilty of murder. Bravo to whoever signed off on that dumb shit. So instead of sitting in prison for the next 8 years, Deputy McGowan would appeal his case while sitting at home. A couple of things happened during this time. One, Susan's family was awarded $5.3 million in a lawsuit against the county and Deputy McGowen. But guess how much of that money they got? Nothing. Because after that judgment, a judge would come in and remove the county from the lawsuit, meaning they didn't have to pay. And I think it's pretty clear that Deputy McGowen doesn't have $5 million. And that was the last information that we can find on the lawsuit. Now, the second thing that would happen, a couple of years after Deputy McGowen's conviction, another judge would come in and throw it out. Because apparently at trial, Deputy McGowen's lawyer wasn't allowed to make an opening statement. That was grounds enough to have his murder conviction thrown out.
But it was not over, because in 2002, Deputy McGowen went back on trial for the murder of Susan White. But this time, the state had an ace in their back pocket. They had a new witness, Deputy McGowen's girlfriend during his first trial. She had a lot to say.
I found him sitting on his bed in the master bedroom with his head in his hands, just pounding his head into his hands and just cursing and swearing and slurring and saying some things that I really couldn't make out. I said, "Susan White, is that who you're talking about?" And he said, "Yup." And he had this kind of strange, bizarre look in his eyes. And at this point, we were talking about getting married. And I had to ask him, I said, "Did you really mean to kill her?" And he said, "Yup." And I said, "Why?" He said, "The effing bitch needed to be killed. She was effing with me. She wanted to get me fired, and she was going to call my wife."
After McGowen's confession, Summer made an alarming discovery.
We were looking for some toys, and I just happened to be looking under the king-size bed there in Kent's bedroom, and there were some photo albums, and it was pictures of dead people, bloodied. I mean, just the most disgusting pictures you've ever seen. And I said, "Kent, why do you have these?" And he said, "Because they're cool." And I jumped up and ran to the bathroom and was sick to my stomach.
This time, it took less than 6 hours for the jury of 8 women and 4 men to find Deputy McGowen guilty of taking Susan White's life. In March of 2002, Joseph Kent McGowen was sentenced to 20 years. This meant he was not going to be allowed out on bond during his appeal. No get-out-of-jail-free card this time. Oh, and speaking of those appeals, he lost all of them and would wind up serving 19 years in prison, 1 year shy of his full sentence.
Joseph McGowen was granted his release from federal prison in 2021. To this day, he still maintains his innocence. Here is Joseph McGowen being interviewed on a podcast following his release. It's about 2 hours long, and in it, he gives his version of events. If you want to listen to it, the link will be in the description. I recommend it. You always want to hear both sides to a story and come up with your own conclusion. There were also 2 other documentaries on YouTube. They both covered different parts of the story. Both did a great job covering this case. And there's some pretty good interviews, which you've seen in our video. Our channel is Dark Times with Nico and Sai. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. We're still new to making these longer videos, so any support is so much appreciated.
And it would also be helpful if you liked and subscribed. That's very helpful.
We're trying to answer as many comments as we can, so please make sure to leave some on the video. We are already working on our next video, so please make sure to stay tuned. These things take forever to make. Thank you for the support. Check you later. Bye. We'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.